Hello, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Coin Lady channel. Russia's deputy prime minister said today that his country would stop using the US dollar and the euro in energy trade entirely. Putin's 2014 statement that Russia wants to use national currencies and commerce dates back 9 years. It's fascinating to see the massive push towards cryptocurrency settlement, adoption, and even international payments. Russia has been quite insistent on using any tools deemed essential to facilitate international trade, international transactions, and international settlements. Even if Russia, China, and the Brics are not the only countries beginning to shift away from the US dollar, the current moment surrounding the US currency is particularly intriguing. The main supporter of the US dollar is Saudi Arabia. It's widely held that Saudi Arabia isn't going to be the one to finally put an end to the US currency. However, I respectfully disagree, particularly in view of the fact that the petrodollar arrangement has been a major backstop for the value of the US dollar and a substantial protection against the manufacturing of new US currency. That's it, the last line of defense for the US dollar's worth. Therefore, it's clear that we're in a race against time because as soon as Saudi Arabia starts to push the US dollar, the game is over. Before the dollar's global dominance is threatened, the United States wants a confrontation with China. This is another fascinating area of study. This is because, given the current state of affairs in the US and China, China wants a full-fledged de-dollarization before the US does initiate hostilities. A victor will be declared before the year 2030. Furthermore, I anticipate armed conflict within the next 7 years. It's possible that it might occur at any time now. To keep the value of the dollar up, the United States has relied on war for a very long time. Because of this, we may decide to print even more money and flood the economy with it. It ultimately makes it possible for us to incur even more debt. Most notably, the Treasury anticipates the need to produce an additional $18 trillion in currency by the year 2030. Therefore, going to war is the most prudent course of action. You may verify this with your own research. I've been reading quite a bit about how people perceive the strength of our armed forces. It's fascinating, though, because so much of the military hardware we employ to back up our troops is itself very terrible. Our warships and other hardware have not received adequate maintenance. Therefore, we must launch an offensive immediately. If we don't make a lot of new money, our army won't be able to do much until then. That's why I think $18 trillion could be too much for the economy to handle by 2030. And if we do see a $10 trillion flood the system, I'm not sure you want to be holding the US dollar, which is why it's important to have a diversified portfolio that includes not just digital currencies but also gold, silver, and other commodities. War, it seems, is something the United States actively seeks. De-dollarization is what I believe will happen. This evidence shows that we are to blame. De-dollarization, global reserve currencies, proxy conflicts in Russia, Ukraine, China, and Taiwan, and more were all discussed in this conversation with Douglas McGregor. I'm going to start playing this quick little Twitter conversation I had with Natalie Brunel. And then we can go into greater depth on the topic. By mandating that all transactions be made in dollars. We do this by selling off our debt to other companies and by making it easy for companies all around the world to transact with one another. And we've been so successful in intimidating others for so long that some are starting to believe China and Russia might actually be onto something. Why must all transactions be made in US dollars? This doesn't mean the reserve currency will suddenly vanish. But I think it's in serious trouble. Because of this, dollarization in the D is becoming an increasingly urgent problem. Despite the importance we should give it, I think we are to fault. At some point, people will return and say they've had enough. As you say, if you keep using this weapon, this financial weapon, again and over again. And sure enough, that's precisely what happened. The US dollar is a tool in our financial arsenal. For a very long time, in fact. Now, though, many of these nations have finally had enough. He also questioned why the dollar is still used in so many developing nations. One of the world's reserve currencies is the US dollar. However, Brazil has also lately shared its thoughts on the matter. I used them in a film to show how the dollar is declining. The status of reserve will not be lost overnight, that's for sure. The short answer is no. Therefore, we predict that the United States, in the next 7 years, will face significant challenges, including the outbreak of war or a full-scale de-dollarization. And we have only ourselves to blame. We have inflated the system, printed excessive amounts of money, and caused significant harm to all other big countries. Now you know that the United States' chances of winning are practically nil. Give some details on what you see over here. By 2028, the Brics nations Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa are forecast to have a higher combined GDP growth rate than the G7. It's true that many of these nations aren't just generating money, but are manufacturing value for export. We know that the value of the US dollar as a unit of exchange has declined dramatically since the Fed's creation, and that the dollar is now functionally useless. Therefore, when we talk about printing money, the United States isn't really manufacturing money. Even though the US dollar isn't as strong as it once was, you can still use it to buy food at the supermarket. In addition, we are well aware that the Federal Reserve and the Treasury's attempts at fiat currency have failed. Therefore, it is not surprising that the Brics will virtually overtake the G7 nations in terms of global economic development, given that debt is the only thing holding us afloat. It's ludicrous, but we're counting on foreign countries to acquire our debts so that we can earn interest. Furthermore, they have already indicated that by 2030, we will be contributing 30% of taxpayer dollars towards the debt with the $18 trillion they want to build. This makes no sense at all. That can't go on forever. Treasury Secretary Yellen argues that the sanctions imposed on Russia and other countries threaten the US dollar's hegemonic position in the global economy. Even though I may not have mentioned this in a video until very recently, I want you all to know that we have seen the idea of the United States waking up to the awareness of what they have done. I said from the start that enforcing sanctions against Russia would be difficult for the United States. Again, I think that's what accelerated a major pushback. Since these nations were completed, dollarization with the US occurred. The games or efforts that the US has been playing for so long have become tiresome and old. I think people, especially in the United States, are starting to see through their lies. The dollar's status as a reserve currency is threatened, as even Peter Schiff has warned. And while we may not always see eye to eye, there is one area on which Peter Schiff and I agree. And as we shall see below, he did in fact provide a warning that the United States and the currency were about to take a devastating blow. The dollar will lose its status as the world's reserve currency as a result of the current financial crisis. I've been reminding everyone that although it is a financial crisis, most people are still reluctant to term it a crisis because the financial crisis of 2008 was less in scope and had less of an impact overall. It will be like 2008 all over again when the dollar is no longer the world's reserve currency. We haven't seen anything like it in over a century. That much I can guarantee. Moreover, we have no idea how this will show up. But it won't have any visual appeal. And this is where we find out if Dallas dollarization is happening and if it is a real challenge to the US dollar's status as the world's reserve currency. Schiff claims that the only surprising thing about the dollar's reserve status is that it still exists at all. That right has not been taken away from us. Despite our best efforts, it seems. The current financial crisis will, in my opinion, eventually lead to a change in the status quo. Still, few are willing to call it what it is, a financial catastrophe. He did add that it's bigger than 2008, though. After that, it'll cause politicians to be even more hasty and extreme with their fiscal and monetary policies. This time the dollar reserve will be affected as well. Since that would lead to much higher inflation and worse living standards in the United States, it would make life very challenging for us. Inflation is a concern for any country that prints its own currency, as we shall see. The question is how great that risk is. I submit that it is currently greater than it has ever been. And avoiding that result is necessary if we are to stop it from happening. To rephrase, some very tough political decisions will have to be made to prevent this. Again, it seems we're in the midst of a crisis that few are willing to acknowledge. The vast majority of major news outlets have yet to report on it. To me, cryptocurrencies are very much like that. I've discussed them before, and I think they are a great way to avoid the problems associated with the US dollar. The value of Bitcoin, Ethereum, XRP, and the rest of the cryptocurrency market is constantly being compared to the US dollar. But for my purposes, one XRP is the same as any other XRP. The future of the dollar as we know it today is uncertain. Nonetheless, I will not sit here and predict that the dollar will be practically worthless by the year 2025. However, in my opinion, fiat money has failed, and I don't think it's possible to completely reverse the trend line with paper currency. I've been talking about this more and more in my videos as of late. Once we have a central bank in charge of fiscal policy, you can pretty much forget about the value of the dollar. The Federal Reserve has destroyed its value from the day it was established. And it's all thanks to something we let happen, a big overprinting of the dollar, which throws the economy into disarray. The only question now is how much harm we can inflict before something breaks. The Federal Reserve has gotten us here. Currently, we are at that point. And there was nothing they could do but sit back and hope something went wrong. In March, the first bank started to fall. Do you seriously think that's how things will play out? Some banks have indeed collapsed. If everything seems to be fine now, then it's safe to say that we haven't seen anything yet. You only got a sneak peek into the future. More widespread financial collapse is inevitable. But that's why I said I had faith that crypto will hold up against it. The value of cryptocurrencies has been mostly stable since March. Bitcoin, as an example, did experience a dip in value during the banking crisis, but it has since recovered. Since then, things have improved dramatically. This is because many people have moved their money out of banks and into cryptocurrencies due to widespread unease about the future of traditional banking. But if we take a look at the dollar right now, I do think we're hanging by a very thin thread. I've been checking this, for instance, once a month. Once a month, every month. We seem to be holding our own, so that's good news. You can see that we are still riding the waves from May if you take a look at this, which is fairly good news as far as support goes. Does it matter even a little bit? No, I think we'll end up losing this. In this market, I expect the dollar's decline to continue. In my opinion, the region below 99 is where we should focus our attention next. 9,899. However, I anticipate this trend continuing. Even more bizarrely, someone really responded to my most recent video on the US dollar. In fact, they were discussing it, and one of them noted that the macro chart was quite interesting. If you look at the macro chart and extend it all the way back to the 1980s, you'll see that this has indeed been on the decrease from well before the 1960s, all the way back to, as I mentioned, the Fed's inception. Take it to the next level. However, this is a lower high than the previous one. The subsequent lower high is probably going to be somewhere in the 80s to 90s. Our government's huge money printing and market inflating use of US dollars will ensure that this is the case, as we have no other means of supporting ourselves financially. US fiscal policy has not changed in any way that can be considered long-term. That's why people are starting to notice that guess what de-dollarization and a serious campaign against the United States are taking place. Possible future collaboration between Saudi Arabia and the Brics nations was discussed between Putin and the Saudi Crown Prince on the yesterday. Just as I had predicted, this would be the last straw for the US currency. That event is currently the most noteworthy happening in the near future. What Saudi Arabia is doing should not be hidden from the public eye. There are a lot of folks who keep making remarks about how relevant it is. That is completely unimportant. For the US currency, the petrodollar pact is extremely important. That much I will say now. That's the ultimate blow to the US dollar standing as a global reserve currency. In fact, it is. The US dollar's status as the world's reserve currency will also be severely harmed. It's clear that Putin and the Saudi Crown Prince approved of the level of coordination being employed at OPEC Plus to keep the oil market stable around the world. Do you see how everyone is having fun down here? In essence, that's what the text said. The potential for cooperation between Saudi Arabia and the Brics nations is also considered below. They reaffirmed their interest in joining the BRIC nations. The BRICS alliance contains South Africa, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, and Arabia has shown an interest in joining. The BRICS nations have stepped up their efforts to diversify their economies away from the currency. They're supposedly developing a new currency as well. To combat the West's harmful acts, the BRICS nations are working to expand their global influence. A Russian source recently reported that former Treasury Secretary Lawrence Summers had expressed concern about the challenges facing the United States in light of the growing alignment and acquisition of global influence by countries such as China, Russia, and the Middle East. Fitch Solutions researchers believe that the dollar's hegemony is threatened by the de-dollarization of the Brics, China, and cryptocurrency. The US dollar and the US global dominance will undoubtedly take some hits in the near future. The downfall of the US dollar's value as a reserve currency is inevitable. The only question is how much further it will fall. And what's this? It'll be knocked out cold and out of commission before you know it. All of these changes in the environment are bringing the final blow to Saudi Arabia closer. The atmosphere has indeed shifted. The Middle East is evolving as a result of China's growing influence there. As of last week, China had purchased its first stake in the Qatari gas field. In addition, a Chinese company has expressed interest in investing $10 billion to develop Afghanistan's vast lithium reserves. Last month, China negotiated an agreement between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and efforts to end the situation in Yemen are also making headway at this time. It's worth noting that China is the world's largest importer of crude oil, and that Saudi Arabia is China's primary source of crude oil imports. In 2022, China was the source of 30% of all of Iran's exports and imports. My apologies, but Iran and Saudi Arabia are both looking at joining the BRIC nations. Death blow after death blow, the BRICS have been growing as the puzzle parts fit together. That is to say, it is essentially the last one of any significance. The final major development is the outright rejection of the petrodollar accord, despite widespread speculation that it had already been finalized. Do you believe the petrodollar agreement has ended? Please share your thoughts in the comments section below. Any and all feedback is much appreciated. If you enjoyed the video, however, click the like button below to subscribe to our channel and never miss an episode. See you in the next video. Bye.